In a world where men bend like reeds before every passing storm, the rarest sight isn't gold or diamonds or ancient artifacts unearthed from forgotten depths. It's the man who stands unmoved. The man who remains centered when everything around him spins into madness. The man whose presence creates stillness in the heart of pandemonium. The man who becomes the eye of the hurricane rather than debris caught in its spiral. This isn't about stubbornness. Mules are stubborn. Stones are rigid. Fools are inflexible. This is about something far more profound, far more powerful, far more necessary in times that systematically destabilize everything once considered certain. This is about becoming an immovable force, not through ignorance of the chaos, but through mastery of it. Not through denial of turbulence, but through transcendence of it. Not through avoidance of disorder, but through alchemical conversion of it. For centuries, warriors have understood a truth that modern comfort has allowed most to forget. Chaos isn't just inevitable, it's essential. Disorder isn't just common, it's clarifying. Disruption isn't just frequent, it's revelatory. These forces don't just test men, they create them. They don't just challenge character, they reveal it. They don't just measure capacity, they forge it. But only for those who understand the fundamental distinction between reacting to chaos and responding to it, between being acted upon by external forces and acting from internal sovereignty despite them, between being swept away by currents and standing immovable within them. The immovable man isn't born. He's forged deliberately, methodically, relentlessly, through the systematic cultivation of four essential pillars that together create unshakable presence in even the most destabilizing circumstances. The first pillar, physical sovereignty. Your body isn't just transportation for your consciousness. It's the primary interface through which you experience existence. When your physical vessel destabilizes, everything built upon it inevitably follows. The immovable man understands this architectural reality and builds his physical foundation accordingly, not through sporadic engagement with trendy fitness programs, but through disciplined cultivation of fundamental capacities. Strength that enables standing when others collapse, endurance that permits continuing when others quit, resilience that allows recovering when others break. He trains not for aesthetic enhancement or social approval, but for functional capacity under precisely the conditions others consider unendurable. He deliberately exposes himself to controlled discomfort or hunger when others must eat, to cold when others require warmth, to exertion when others demand rest, not from masochistic impulse, but from strategic foresight that recognizes coming storms will create involuntary versions of these same conditions. He conditions his nervous system to maintain optimal function during elevated stress, rather than catering to its preference for perpetual comfort. Recognizing that decisions made through a dysregulated system inevitably create catastrophic outcomes. Through this disciplined physical sovereignty, he establishes the essential foundation upon which all other aspects of immovability depend. Without this base, everything constructed above it will inevitably falter when genuine pressure arrives. The second pillar, mental clarity. Your mind isn't neutral territory. It's constantly colonized by external influences, commercial interests, engineering specific desires, media entities manufacturing particular fears, social pressures cultivating certain conformities, technological systems weaponizing innate vulnerabilities. The immovable man recognizes these colonizing forces not as conspiracy theories, but as observable mechanisms deliberately designed to destabilize internal sovereignty and replace it with external control to create perpetual reactivity, rather than considered response, to foster continuous anxiety rather than resolute calm, to ensure constant distraction rather than focused attention. He systematically reclaims his cognitive territory through deliberate practices, information filtration that prevents mimetic infection, attention discipline that preserves finite focus for worthy subjects, thought curation that distinguishes between internally generated insight and externally implanted programming. He develops metacognitive awareness that allows observing his own thought patterns without automatic identification with them, enabling distinction between authentic perception and manufactured reaction, between genuine insight and implanted response, between original conclusion and prefabricated judgment. Through this cultivated mental clarity, he establishes the second essential component of immovability, the capacity to perceive reality directly rather than through distortion lenses installed by external programmers with interests fundamentally opposed to his sovereignty. The third pillar, emotional self-command. Your emotional system isn't designed for contemporary conditions. It evolved for an environment radically different from your current reality, where threats were immediate rather than abstract, where social context encompassed dozens rather than billions, where information arrived occasionally rather than incessantly. The immovable man doesn't attempt to eliminate emotions. Fool's errand attempted only by those who misunderstand this ancient system's essential purpose. Instead, he develops sophisticated command over their expression, their duration, their intensity, and most critically, their influence over his decision-making processes. He cultivates response flexibility that creates space between stimulus and reaction, allowing for executive oversight of emotional activation rather than automatic behavior driven by limbic impulse. He develops emotional differentiation that distinguishes between core effects and their cognitive elaborations, enabling precision in addressing actual emotional states rather than their conceptual manifestations. He practices emotional non-attachment that permits experiencing feelings completely without becoming captive to their action tendencies, creating freedom to incorporate emotional data without surrendering behavioral choice to momentary states. Through this emotional self-command, he establishes the third crucial element of immovability, the ability to utilize emotional intelligence without becoming subject to emotional capture, to benefit from effective wisdom without suffering affective hijacking, to incorporate feeling without surrendering sovereignty. The fourth pillar, spiritual rootedness. Your existence requires meaning to withstand chaos. Without profound purpose anchored beyond temporary circumstances, even the strongest man eventually succumbs to the fundamental question, why endure? Why persist? Why continue against relentless opposition? The immovable man recognizes that physical sovereignty creates capacity, mental clarity provides perception, and emotional self-command enables choice, but only spiritual rootedness supplies the necessary why that makes these capacities worth deploying in the face of overwhelming chaos. He connects to purposes larger than personal comfort, to missions extending beyond individual advantage, to values transcending temporary benefit, not through casual philosophical tourism, but through disciplined contemplative practice that repeatedly returns attention to what ultimate matters beyond fluctuating circumstances. He cultivates direct relationship with sources of meaning so compelling, they transform obstacles from burdens to be avoided into opportunities to be embraced, challenges from misfortunes to be escaped into invitations to be accepted, hardships from punishments to be resented into teachers to be appreciated. Through this spiritual rootedness, he establishes the fourth and culminating element of immovability, existential foundation that answers not how to stand against chaos, but why standing matters regardless of apparent cost, regardless of visible outcome, regardless of external validation. These four pillars, physical sovereignty, mental clarity, emotional self-command, and spiritual rootedness together, create the architecture of immovability that enables standing unmoved amidst chaos that displaces everyone else. But understand, this immovability isn't rigid inflexibility. It isn't mindless stubbornness. It isn't predetermined programming that executes regardless of circumstance. The immovable man possesses the paradoxical capacity to remain centered while adapting perfectly to emerging conditions, to maintain internal coherence while demonstrating external appropriateness, to preserve essential integrity while displaying situational flexibility, to anchor in timeless principles while navigating temporal circumstances. He exemplifies the ancient martial wisdom expressed by the Japanese concept of Fudoshin, the immovable mind that remains undisturbed by external turbulence while responding perfectly to its shifting patterns, like the eye of the hurricane that remains stationary while the winds around it rotate with devastating force. This capacity proves especially crucial during societal fragmentation, during cultural dissolution, during civilizational disruption times when everything previously solid liquefies, when institutions trusted for stability reveal fundamental corruption, when authorities presumed trustworthy demonstrate comprehensive betrayal. During such periods, which you undoubtedly recognize in your current experience, most men respond in one of three dysfunctional patterns. Some desperately cling to dissolving structures, defending increasingly indefensible systems, denying increasingly undeniable evidence, and attaching their identity to institutional legitimacy collapsing before their eyes. Others surrender to nihilistic despair, abandoning the possibility of meaning amid chaos, relinquishing personal agency amid uncertainty, and descending into numb distraction, substance escape, or bitter resentment. Still others embrace fanatical certainty, adopting extreme ideologies that promise simple explanations for complex phenomena, that offer clear enemies responsible for all problems, that provide ready-made identities requiring zero individual discernment. But the immovable man implements a fourth pattern entirely. He stands in the vortex, neither denying its existence, nor surrendering to its pull, nor embracing desperate oversimplification, but fully present to its reality while remaining internally sovereign despite its influence. He becomes the reference point others use for orientation when everything familiar disappears. He embodies the stability others seek for recalibration when all external anchors dissolve. He radiates the certainty others need for reassurance when doubt infects everything else. Not through grandstanding declaration, but through quiet demonstration. Not through theoretical articulation, but through embodied manifestation. Not through claiming immovability, but through displaying it when everything else gives way. This immovability transforms the chaos around him not by eliminating it directly, but by creating a field of coherence that affects everything within its radius. Like the tuning fork that brings discordant instruments into harmony not by silencing them, but by offering unwavering reference tone. The immovable man doesn't attempt to control the chaos, but instead provides the stable center around which it can reorganize. This phenomenon extends beyond metaphor into observable reality. When one individual maintains genuine coherence amidst collective incoherence, their field begins affecting nearby systems. When one man embodies authentic sovereignty amidst widespread reactivity, his presence influences surrounding reactions. When one consciousness demonstrates true stability amidst general instability, it creates ripples through connected networks. This isn't mystical speculation, but practical observation. Not esoteric theory, but tangible effect. The immovable man doesn't just withstand chaos for personal benefit, but transforms it through his unwavering presence, converting disorder around him into higher order without direct intervention. But this capacity for chaos transformation through steadfast presence comes at significant cost. It requires systematic surrender of common comforts, of easy escapes, of convenient excuses that most men rely upon to justify their reactivity, their instability, their continuous surrender to external influence. Developing physical sovereignty demands voluntary hardship when everyone else pursues voluntary ease. Cultivating mental clarity requires information discipline when everyone else consumes without discernment. Establishing emotional self-command necessitates impulse regulation when everyone else indulges without restriction. Building spiritual rootedness involves existential confrontation when everyone else distracts without interruption. Each of these developmental demands creates friction with contemporary environments specifically engineered to produce exactly the opposite. To eliminate physical challenge, to overwhelm cognitive filtration, to trigger emotional reactivity, to prevent contemplative depth. This environmental opposition isn't accidental but architectural. Systems requiring compliance function more efficiently with physically dependent participants. Narratives needing acceptance operate more effectively with mentally captured audiences. Manipulations demanding response work more reliably with emotionally reactive subjects. Agendas requiring allegiance succeed more predictably with spiritually unrooted adherents. The immovable man thus finds himself in perpetual countercurrent, not because he seeks opposition, but because his development inherently threatens systems requiring his diminishment, his destabilization, his continuous manipulation by external forces. Yet despite this constant friction, despite this systematic resistance, despite this environmental engineering specifically designed to prevent the very sovereignty he cultivates, continues building his capacity for immovability with the patient persistence that distinguishes masters from amateurs, the strategic foresight that separates victors from victims, the unwavering discipline that differentiates leaders from followers. He doesn't just endure the countercurrent, he utilizes it. He doesn't just withstand the resistance, he incorporates it. He doesn't just survive the opposition, he transforms it, converting what would destroy weaker men into precisely the forge required to strengthen himself, transmuting what would defeat lesser consciousness into exactly the resistance needed to develop himself, reformulating what would crush smaller spirits into the very pressure required to elevate himself. This alchemical conversion from opposition to opportunity, from resistance to development, from friction to formation, represents the ultimate capacity of the truly immovable man. He doesn't merely remain standing despite the chaos, he becomes stronger because of it. Each storm that displaces others only deepens his roots. Each current that carries away others only strengthens his stance. Each pressure that deforms others only solidifies his structure, until he embodies the paradox expressed by the ancient Stoic Seneca. The man who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive, not through prediction of specific events, but through development of general capacity, not through foreknowledge of particular challenges, but through prior cultivation of universal sovereignty. The immovable man doesn't know exactly what chaos will arrive, but he knows with certainty that chaos will arrive. And rather than hoping it chooses another target, rather than praying it strikes with minimal force, rather than wishing it passes quickly, prepares so thoroughly that its arrival becomes not threat but confirmation, not danger but opportunity, not peril but proof of exactly the capacity he's systematically developed. This preparation isn't paranoia but pragmatism. It isn't fearful anticipation but strategic foresight. It isn't anxious preoccupation but practical recognition that existence inherently contains disruption, that reality fundamentally includes turbulence, that the cosmos necessarily encompasses chaos. The immovable man doesn't resent these conditions. He doesn't protest this reality. He doesn't demand different circumstances. He simply builds himself into someone who remains sovereign regardless of external conditions, centered regardless of surrounding turbulence, grounded regardless of environmental instability. And in that unshakable presence, he becomes something beyond mere individual, becomes possibility incarnate. The living demonstration that different response remains available despite overwhelming pressure for reactivity. The breathing proof that internal sovereignty stays possible despite external conditions designed to eliminate it. The walking evidence that immovability persists as viable option despite chaos, specifically engineered to ensure universal instability. His existence becomes the unanswerable argument against inevitability of surrender. His presence becomes the undeniable testament against necessity of submission. His continuation becomes the irrefutable evidence against requirement of capitulation. So build yourself into this immovable force. Forge yourself into this unwavering presence. Transform yourself into this unshakable manifestation of sovereignty amidst chaos that displaces everyone else. Not because it's easy, but because it's essential. Not because it's common, but because it's necessary. Not because it's celebrated, but because it's irreplaceable. The world doesn't need more men who move with every current. It needs men who stand when currents threaten everything. It doesn't require additional participants in chaos. It requires anchors against it. It doesn't demand more contributors to instability. It demands counterweights against it. Become the immovable force that transforms chaos not through conquest but through coherence. not through domination but through demonstration, not through control but through contrast that reveals different possibility remains available regardless of how many choose reactivity instead. The chaos will continue, the turbulence will increase, the disruption will intensify, and within this storm, you have one fundamental choice. Become debris moved by forces beyond your determination, or become the immovable center that creates possibility of different response for everyone within your radius of influence. Choose immovability, choose sovereignty, choose the warrior's path of standing unmoved when everything around you surrenders to the storm. The world may never thank you, may never acknowledge your choice, may never even recognize what you've preserved through your unwavering presence. But in your unshakable immovability, you'll know. And sometimes that knowledge alone provides all the foundation you require to stand unmoved while chaos consumes everything else.